All right, so we want to shift gears now to a story that's been that at times has dominated national headlines, and it's this: the Idaho College murders. That is on your top left. Bryan Kohberger. He is facing a sentencing hearing. And we are expected to, I guess we are hearing or expected to hear from families of the victims to speak ahead of this sentencing. Let's take a listen in to what's being said at this moment.
As Your Honor will recall, on June 18th, it's just really not that long ago, we appeared before this court for arguments on what became the defendant's final motions to this court. Motion where they wanted to offer evidence suggesting that other people were responsible for the defendant's actions, and the motion seeking essentially an indefinite continuance of the trial. It was readily apparent to all of us in the courtroom from Your Honor's comments that those motions were not going to be granted. So we returned to Moscow and continued with what we had been working on for months in preparation for trial. We had no qualms about going to trial if trial was what was necessary and appropriate. The following week, after we were in court, we were approached by the defense with an inquiry about a possible plea. And I can tell the court this is the first suggestion ever that there was any consideration, because indeed, the defense had maintained from the beginning that Mr. Kohberger, the defendant, was factually innocent. It's clear that the reality of the evidence and the case that had been investigated and prepared and that we were ready to present in court became a reality. Our reaction, among other things, was to reach out to all the families. And in fact, later that week, on Thursday and Friday of that last week of June, we met with representatives by teams, virtual meetings, with representatives of all of the families. And we talked about the status of the case and the upcoming trial and things that related to the trial. And we also let them know that there had been an inquiry about whether there might be an offer for a plea. And we asked the family members for their thoughts and feelings. And they were candid. And they have been candid since, and we respect that. And we understand, recognize, and acknowledge that there was a difference of opinion among representatives of the different families. We understand that. One of the challenges of this case, one of the unique things about this case is we have multiple victims, each unique unto themselves, their families and friends unique unto themselves, and all of them entitled to their opinions, all of them entitled to their thoughts. Over the following weekend, our prosecution team, very skilled attorneys who were personally as well as professionally deeply invested in this case, met. And we talked, and the decision was reached. Well, to start with, were there to be any sort of plea offer or discussion, there's only one possibility. And that would be for the defendant to plead guilty straight up to all charges. There would be no bargaining about counts. There would be no bargaining about reduced sentences. And so we made the proposal to the defense that if the defendant was willing to plead guilty up front to all 5 counts as charged and waive appeal of the court's myriad decisions during the past 2.5+ years on all of these motions that would have consumed years, if not decades, of time in the future. By the end of the weekend, we were notified the defendant was prepared to plead guilty as charged. and factually acknowledge his responsibility in court for these horrible crimes. Obviously, those discussions and negotiations were confidential. And as Your Honor noted, I believe, that was necessarily so, because if the defendant had decided not to plead guilty, it would have been devastating to our jury pool for there to be public information that there had been consideration by either party to a plea resolution. And protecting the prospective integrity of a trial after so many years was paramount. So, the end of the weekend came. We notified the victims' families of what had occurred. I recognize and acknowledge personally, and I respect the fact that of these fine, suffering people here, not everybody agreed with the decision we make. I accept that. It's my responsibility in the end. I recognize that that's the duty of the office that I hold. So now, it is time for the judicial system to impose final judgment and close the door on this chapter of these tragedies. As the court is aware, by the agreement of the parties, it is the state's prayer. Perhaps have the Elmo police turned on. Thank you. That on count one, the felony burglary, that the court sentenced the defendant to the maximum period of 10 years fixed in the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction. Then on count two, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Maddie Mogen. On count three, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Kaylee Goncalves. On count four, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Xana Kernodle. On count five, that the court sentenced the defendant to fixed life for the murder of Chapin. And the state further prays that these sentences be ordered to run consecutively, back to back, not at the same time, to recognize and respect the unique individuality of each of these beautiful young people whose lives were taken brutally and for no reason. And hopefully now, as we have heard earlier this morning, it is time to afford the families and the friends and the community and the state of Idaho and the nation and the world to move forward. We can't undo, and we can never undo, the horror of what occurred on the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022 at 1122 King Street in Moscow, Idaho. For a long time, the presiding district judge in Latah County was John Stegner, who eventually became a member and a justice of the Idaho Supreme Court. And Justice Stegner often observed that even God cannot change the past. But everyone in this room has the ability to take themselves forward. And we want the judicial system to afford them the opportunity today to do that. From today forward, our memories should be focused on these innocent victims whose lives were taken, on their families, on their friends, on the community. The court has heard discussion, talk today, reminiscences today about a special family that our victims shared, not just their natural, legal, and biological families, not just their university family within their sororities, for example. But this family. This is the picture taken on November 12th, 2022, of the special family of 1122 King Road. And you can see all 6 of these dynamic, vibrant, loving, special, innocent faces taken together just across the street from their residence, and barely 12 hours before 4 of them would be brutally murdered in their sleep. They've been described consistently as being bright, caring, vivacious, with futures we can only imagine now. But they were, and they remain, a special family that I think we should all recognize and appreciate. So it's time to move forward. There have been a number of statements directed specifically at the defendant today. I have one last thought. After Your Honor imposes judgment and sentences the defendant to spend the rest of his life in prison, in other words, sentence the defendant to die in prison, he's going to stand up in the belly chains and leg irons that he's wearing today, and he's going to be escorted into the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction. And the door will close behind him forever. That is the closure that we seek, that all of these people, these loving friends and family deserve, so that we can move forward. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, does the defense have evidence to present today?
No evidence.
All right. Does defense wish to make argument today?
Runner, we do not wish to make arguments. Mr. Kohberger, along with his legal team, is prepared for the court to enter judgment in this case.
All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
Well, please. All right, let me start this morning by acknowledging and thanking those that have come here today in support of their loved ones, and I appreciate your courage and your strength. And I hope that you are able to move on as best as possible. Thank counsel for the professionalism that they've exhibited throughout this case. It has been my great honor to preside in this case and to help bring, to the extent possible, some resolution and hopefully justice to this case. During the quiet morning hours of November 13, 2022, a faceless coward breached the tranquility of 6 beautiful young people and senselessly slaughtered them, 4 of them. Who committed this unspeakable evil was unknown for several weeks, but due to the killer's incompetence and outstanding police work by numerous local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, the person that slithered through that sliding glass door at 1122 King Road now stands before the world and this court unmasked. This unfathomable and senseless act of evil has caused immeasurable pain and loss. No parent should ever have to bury their child. This is the greatest tragedy that can be inflicted upon a person. Parents who took their children to college in a truck filled with moving boxes had to bring them home in hearses lined with coffins. The loss this killer inflicted was not just the death of these people's children, siblings, grandchildren, as we've heard today. It has ripped a hole in their soul, destroying a special part of their very essence. Any person who is a parent defines themselves foremost as such. It is their existence and purpose of being. And it has been stolen from these parents. None of us have experienced the loss these victims have in the unspeakable way that they have. And therefore, none of us can, nor should we, question the way in which they have handled their loss. Whether that be in private mourning, removed as far as possible from this media circus, or in front of a camera demanding retribution with the loudest megaphone. I've listened intently to the stories and pain that have been shared today, with great awe at the courage and resilience of the surviving family members of those wonderful children. I've listened also to the surviving roommates, both in person and through their friends. And I can't think of how, frankly, courageous they have been despite the hell that they have faced by uncaring people who have come up with all kinds of crazy theories about 2 kids simply being kids. The parents, siblings, and other family members who have spoken today are designated as victims in our legal system. But going forward, I hope that they can shed that label, as it gives too much power to the evil that condemned them to that role. They are and should be known as survivors, fighters, and foremost as witnesses to the tremendous lives of value and unbounded promise of these 4 young people. But those speaking today and those who did not speak, but who carry the same burden, this same loss, now carry forward the memories of these now perpetually young people, these forever children. These survivors carry the responsibility of ensuring that the voices of these children, Maddie, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan, are never forgotten, and the positive impacts that they have had on so many lives are never minimized, and that the love they shared the light that they shined onto others is forever celebrated. As we sit here today, this case is ending, and we are now certain who committed these unspeakable acts of evil, but we don't know, and what we may never know is why. I share the desire expressed by others to understand the why, but upon reflection, it seems to me, and this is just my own opinion, that by continuing to focus on why, we continue to give Mr. Kohberger relevance. We give him agency and we give him power. The need to know what is inherently not understandable makes us dependent upon the defendant to provide us with a reason, and that gives him the spotlight, the attention, and the power he appears to crave. Yet even if I could force him to speak, which legally I cannot, how could anyone ever be assured that what he speaks is the truth? Do we really believe, after all of this, he's capable of speaking the truth or of giving up something of himself to help the very people whose lives he destroyed? Rather, I suspect the so-called reason would be dished out in enticing, self-serving, and aggrandizing untruthful bits, leaving people wanting more information, more insight, and thus enhancing even further the power he seeks to hold. Even if we could get truthful insight into his why, I suspect it would not in any way quench one's thirst for actually understanding why in the first instance. Because there is no reason for these crimes that could approach anything resembling rationality. No conceivable reason could make any sense. And in the end, the more we struggle to seek explanation for the unexplainable, the more we try to extract a reason, the more power and control we give to him. In my view, the time has now come to end Mr. Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame. It's time that he be consigned to the ignominy and isolation of perpetual incarceration. I know there has been concern about him collaborating on books or movies or other media projects, and I truly hope that someone does not stoop to affording him this spotlight that he desires in the name of clicks, royalties, or profits. While criminal behavioralists should study him away from the spotlight in an attempt to prevent other would-be killers from acting on their worst impulses, there should be no need for that to spill over into the public eye. The great Idaho jurist Edward Lodge was known for trying to find something positive about every person he ever sentenced. And with over a half a century as a trial judge, that was a lot of people. This was often challenging, and I recall in one case he said that the best he could come up with was the defendant had good penmanship. Truth be told, I'm unable to come up with anything redeeming about Mr. Kohberger because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. His actions have made him the worst of the worst. Even in pleading guilty, he is giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption, nothing suggesting even a recognition or understanding, let alone regret for the pain that he has caused. And therefore, I will not attempt to speak about him further, other than to simply sentence him so that he is forever removed from civilized society. And accordingly, based upon his conduct and based upon the record before this court, recognizing the standards that govern this court's sentencing decisions as set forth in State v. Toohill, I hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogen. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Goncalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim of the family. or to the family of the victim, pardon me. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentenced the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 5, for the first-degree murder of Ethan Chapin, I sentenced the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. The sentences on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shall run consecutively to one another. Restitution will be left open for 60 days. Defendant will be required to submit a DNA sample and a right thumbprint impression to the Department of Corrections and comply with the DNA Database Act. I remand the defendant to the custody of the Idaho State Board of Corrections for to be imprisoned in an appropriate facility in execution of the sentence where he will remain until he dies. Though you have waived your right to appeal, you do have a right to file a notice of appeal, and any such appeal must be filed within 42 days of the date of the written judgment, which will be entered shortly hereafter. Though the appeal, you should be aware, may be deemed a violation of the plea agreement, and so I certainly suggest you discuss that with counsel if that is your desire. I ask the media and public present to allow the families to be escorted out first before they leave. Again, thank you to everyone for your stories today. I am strengthened by them, and I am encouraged by your humanity and strength, and God bless you. We're adjourned.
All right, so you're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. Up next, Servant. It is 1:35 there. You were watching the sentencing of Bryan Kohberger. As we heard there, given 4 life sentences without parole for the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho university students nearly 3 years ago, back in 2022. The judge, emotional, giving his speech there before sentencing. We want to take you now to King 5, our content partners there in Seattle, Washington, and their coverage and recap after we just learned Bryan Kohberger's sentence. Let's take a listen in.
Judge Timothy Bradshaw has been watching this hearing with me. Your reaction to how this all went down?
So we wanted to know whether the murderer would speak. So the judge quickly told him he had that right. His attorneys glossed over that and quickly indicated that he would not take that opportunity. As we touched on before, he might be a person without empathy, and for him to do so perhaps would have been counterproductive. Maybe he feels no remorse, so how can he express it? There was a public suggestion, very public earlier, that he could be required to give answers, to speak. That's just not legally accurate.
Yes, all he said was, "I respectfully decline," when asked if he had anything to say.
Right.
Prior to that, we've only heard him say the word guilty 5 different times.
That's right.
We heard from, in this hearing, from the family of Madison Mogen. We heard from the Goncalves family, Kernodle family as well, and the 2 surviving roommates who were in the house at the time, and what a poignant picture of the 6 of them the day before these murders happened. When the judge talked about the fact that Kohberger has waived his right to appeal as part of this plea agreement, but he can file a motion to appeal. Explain that. What does that mean?
I think that's just a technicality indicating that he has that right. I think that would be, if he did that, it would be confined to solely challenge the entry of the guilty plea, which is why the judge was so thorough at that time, going through the colloquy with the defendant, that this was out of his own free will, he wasn't coerced, etc.
The one question that a lot of people had is, can he profit from this, right? I mean, he got life in prison without the possibility of parole. He will go through all these appeals, but he could still technically profit from this, write a book, tell his story. The judge obviously addressed that, but he didn't prohibit him from doing so. Did that surprise you, and can the judge do that?
That was disappointing, and I was critical of that when I was here last at the guilty plea, because I believe the prosecuting attorney has the authority to require that as part of the plea bargain. The contract that is made at that time, that's a condition that could have been agreed to. So that begs the question whether on his own accord the judge had the authority today to simply impose that as a condition of the sentence, as a term of the sentence, that he cannot profit in any way from his story from the crimes. Or if he is compensated in any way, those funds would be earmarked for a victims organization or something like that. So I was listening, I was hoping that that would be the case. I don't know why it's not. I know that passes constitutional muster in the state of Washington. I don't know if there's a legal prohibition in Idaho. I doubt it, so I think that was a oversight, particularly because the judge referenced that as an issue. So I'm not sure why that wasn't anticipated.
The other surprising thing that you mentioned during this hearing when the prosecutor was talking is that he actually revealed that it was the defense that brought up the idea of a plea agreement, right? And that's usually confidential. That's right.
Obviously, the prosecutor seems thorough and well-meaning and honorable and genuine. It did seem as if he was taking the opportunity to explain himself, to explain why his office entered into this plea bargain in the first place. So the behind-the-scenes machinations are usually confidential. They definitely are in this state. So that was surprising too.
Well, and I think that surprised a lot of the victims' families. They were not anticipating this. They were getting ready for a trial.
Right.
And so that explains sort of how that unfolded and how they came to that agreement, right?
Obviously, he was trying to justify the plea bargain.
Yeah.
That's very clear,
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that was interesting is that there was only one person out of everybody who spoke today who actually offered Kohberger forgiveness, and that was Xana Kernodle's aunt the first time. I mean, we saw a range of emotions today from the victims' loved ones, for sure. And even the judge himself. You and I were talking during the break, wondering if he would actually say anything and address Kohberger, and he did.
He did.
What did you think of that? And as a judge who's been through these hearings before, how does that impact or affect the victims' families and or potentially the defendant?
So keep in mind the context here. So there's a trajectory of justice. There's a cadence to what we're doing in court. So we begin with the determination that we're going to presume this person innocent, and that is proper. The judge all along has been doing his best to rule, but ensuring due process. Then there's the determination of guilt. He obviously pled guilty. Today, there's a determination of what is justice, what is a proper sentence. So at this point, it becomes a bit awkward for a judge. The judge is sitting there. There's so much symbolism in what we just saw. The judge is in a black robe because that's to show neutrality, to ensure everyone's rights equally. At this point, that is shed, and he's talking about the impact of that guilt. So he didn't hold back.
Yeah, he didn't.
He called him evil, snake, and a coward. So obviously he felt comfortable doing that. But at the same time, it seems as if this defendant earned it.
Yeah. Judge, thank you very much for your insight. Appreciate it. Let's get to Jake Wittenberg, who is live outside the Ada County Courthouse right now. Jake, I see there's people behind you. Have you seen anybody come out of the courthouse at this point?
Yeah, hey there, Mimi. We're awaiting the family to exit the courthouse here and presumably head right to the podium behind us, where you can see there's just a large group of media, a huge number of media that are awaiting to hear what they have to say. When that happens, we'll go right to that. But I also have to say I was struck by what Mr. Bradshaw just said there about the emotion from the judge today. Really ending that hearing today with a punctuation mark. I especially was struck by the moment when Judge Hippler pulled up the picture of the 4 of those students, reminding us that that picture was taken just hours before they were killed. And he was clearly emotional about it, having to pause several times, as we heard there, getting choked up. as he talked about their lives, saying pointedly he is ending the 15 minutes of fame for Bryan Kohberger and relegating him to confinement and taking him away from civil society. Just the emotion that came at the end of this. And as you mentioned, Mimi, that sort of moment in the middle of that second session this morning after the Goncalves family, we heard from the Kernodle family, Xana Kernodle's aunt and uncle, using the words of the defendant, Bryan Kohberger, just the only 2 times we heard that name all morning long, actually saying, as you mentioned, that they forgive him, even turning to Bryan Kohberger at one point and saying, call me, tell me what you were doing, and I will offer you forgiveness, which I thought was a very powerful moment as well. But they went right back into other family members who took the time to berate Kohberger, and in the end, Kohberger himself deciding not to speak, saying, quote, I respectfully decline, just 3 words.
Give us an idea, Jake. You've been there all morning long outside this courthouse. Keep in mind, this case was moved from Latah County to Ada County in Boise. It was the hearing in the largest courtroom there is in that courthouse, but this is a spectacle. I mean, there's been so much national media attention on this case. As you can see behind you, there's a number of media people who are there to cover this case. You've got bloggers and people who are, not necessarily journalists, but people who have an interest in the case trying to get into the courthouse. Describe the scene out there.
Yeah, Mimi, like you, been in the business many years, and every year you seem to see more and more media at events like these because of bloggers and publications, and so there's a tremendous amount of interest here. Yesterday, in the evening hours, the first 50 spots were already full nearly with really non-mainstream media and journalists looking to get inside, internet bloggers, internet sleuths who tried to get in to get a glimpse of this. In the end, it was sorted out. 50 people in, 50 members of the media in. Throughout the day, we've seen people driving by, honking their horns. We're all set up here on the sidewalk here on this main street outside of the Ada County Courthouse. We're seeing people, throngs of people, come by just to get a glimpse of this spectacle out here because they know what's happening here in Boise. People waiting in line saying, I'm not connected to the University of Idaho. I'm not connected to anything except for just my interest in this case. So that has been very eye-opening, and it really lends itself to the gravity here. But really, that punctuation mark from the judge, putting this all to a close, that's the end of the story. It's ending before lunch, which I think was a surprise to many.
Right. I mean, the judge did allow for this to potentially go into tomorrow, but the hearing has just wrapped up after about 2.5 hours. Again, we've heard from all of the victims' families except the Chapin family, who did not even offer a statement. You're looking now at Steve Goncalves, who, wow, his statement was directed solely at Bryan Kohberger. He was the first one to turn that podium around and speak directly at him with anger and disgust. And we also heard from Kaylee's sister, Olivia, who also had a list of questions that she has been wondering for a long time. Jake, I think one of the things that we're going to potentially find out more about. We didn't necessarily get any answers today at today's hearing, but we could because the judge has lifted the gag order. It looks like someone's coming to the podium right now. Can we listen in to this?
Thanks so much.
All right. It appears that...
Well, it's almost been 3 years, and today's the end of a long, hard-fought battle. But we have our person, and we have him where he belongs. So for that, we are thankful for all the men and women that put the work together, put this case together, and once it's part of the court system, it was a little ugly, but we got that conviction, and we're glad to be moving on. Glad we can move on.
But then, there's also the fact that, what would he tell as a lie as to opposed to the truth, so.
The knife, if he gave the knife up, or if he gave a part of this kill kit, if he gave out facts that only the killer would know,
It would corroborate things.
It would corroborate things, and he even addressed there's been way too many conspiracies, and the surviving witnesses had to go through hell. Well, no better way to protect them than by getting some of those details. If you got those details, then, you know, it's as simple as just saying I did it solo would have been, you know, valuable, I think. And you know, we stand by the negotiation wasn't justice. It was just it was a shortcut, and we said from the very beginning we're not interested in a shortcut for our daughter. You know, and we wanted everything.
Steve, you turned the podium at one point. Talk to us about why you wanted to stare him face down.
Because he's a coward. He's been protected by the court from day one, the minute that he was arrested. So I wanted to let him know that I was directing everything towards him, and you know, his days of being protected are coming to an end. You know, from what I've been explained, he gets on a van today, and he's got like 12 minute ride, and then he'll be the responsibility of Idaho State.
Were you planning on turning the podium though, or did you do that?
You know, I remember reading it saying "do not move," so I was like, well, I'm moving this. I just kind of made that decision right then and there. So, you know, I want to make it as difficult as possible. I knew my daughter was going to do a speech, and I'd heard it, and I was like, he's going to hate this. He's going to hate this next set of people that are going to come forward and really rip into him and really expose him for what kind of a piece of trash he was. And we've been waiting a long time to say some of those things that needed to be said.
Stephen Jr., you chose not to speak. Speak now during
I've written up a statement. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe this is where you do.
Okay. Well, allow me a second.
Maybe it wasn't court appropriate.
Yeah, it wasn't. Definitely wasn't. Yeah, my name's Steven Goncalves. I'm Kaylee's older brother. She was my little sister, my friend, the middle child in the heart of our family. There are no words that can fully describe her spirit, but if you knew her, you knew joy, you knew light, you knew someone who made everything better just by being in the room. My statement was largely grounded in one goal, and that was to do everything for anyone who listens to this and has to go through something similar to not have to endure what we had. My family's fought tirelessly, not just for answers, but for accountability. We've stood in front of cameras, behind closed doors, and across from people who didn't want us to speak, but we did, and we won't stop now. Across nearly every murder case prosecuted by Bill Thompson, including the killing of University of Idaho football player Eric McMillan, there is a clear and troubling pattern. Families are left feeling unheard, justice is negotiated down through plea deals, and the public is left with unanswered questions. In the McMillan case, charges were reduced from first-degree to second-degree murder, prompting confusion and outrage from the victim's family and community. The same pattern is emerged in the Silas Parks and John Lee cases, both of which prosecuted by Bill Thompson, where capital-eligible crimes were resolved through plea agreements, sidestepping trials and diminishing public accountability. The most egregious of these crimes was the brutal killing of Whitney Parks, a young pregnant woman whose life was taken by her husband Silas Parks during a violent domestic assault. Whitney was only 22 years old. Whitney was beaten and strangled in her own home, an act of cruelty that not only ended her life, but also the life of her unborn child. And yet, despite the devastating nature of this crime, Bill Thompson reduced the charges from murder to voluntary manslaughter, ultimately securing a sentence that allowed Parks the possibility of parole after just 5 years. There was no trial, no full accounting of what Whitney endured, no acknowledgement in the legal outcomes of the child she was carrying. For Whitney's family, and for anyone who believes that justice systems should speak forcefully for victims, this wasn't justice. It was a deal, and it was like so many others under Thompson's watch. It prioritized expedience over accountability. Now, almost predictably, we find ourselves reliving that pattern in the current case. Despite the magnitude and brutality of the crime, the prosecution chose to accept a plea deal behind closed doors, without trial, without ever consulting our family in any meaningful way. In fact, we learned from the plea deal that had been finalized from an email from the prosecution team. Not in person, not with warning, not with respect. That moment underscored what we feared all along, and that this case was following the same well-worn path toward expedience over justice. Sentencing once again fails to reflect the severity of the act, and the emotional fallout has landed again on the shoulders of the victims' families, who have been left out, unheard, and grieving not just a horrific loss, but a system that continues to bypass them. The through line is undeniable. Whether it's 2004 or 2025, this prosecutional, is that a word? Sorry. Prosecutional approach has consistently abandoned the very approach it is, or the very people it is supposed to protect. The trends you'll notice from Thompson's prosecuted crimes are the following: plea bargains avoiding capital punishment, charge reductions, sentences that misalign with the gravity of the crime, lack of trial due to plea bargains. These aren't just failures in process, they're failures that have real consequences for real people. After reviewing Bill Thompson's history, it's clear our family was never given a fair chance at justice, but this isn't just about a prosecutor's record, it's about Kaylee. It's about my sister. She's not just one of the Idaho 4. She was a daughter, a sister, a best friend, and the light in every room she walked into. When the prosecution followed the same path we've seen before, closed doors, limited input, and a plea deal handed down without our voice, it became painfully clear that Kaylee was being treated just like another case. But she wasn't. She was everything to us, and our pain has only deepened, knowing that the system didn't fight for her the way she deserved. I'll leave everyone with this. There's 1,000 things I wish I could say to Kaylee, but today I'll just say this. I will always carry her with me for the rest of my life, and I will never stop being her brother.
Steve,
thank you.
Now that the gag order is lifted, is there anything that you learned over the last 2.5 years from the investigators or the prosecutors that you can share with us now that you can speak about?
Well, I think it was kind of interesting that once the president sent a truth statement out, they called us right up and they told us everything. So I don't know what was holding them back before, but we spent about 3 hours, close to 3 hours with the lead detectives, and yeah, we found because our main thing was we didn't want to have victims advocate statements that had lies and misquotes and misinformation in it. So I appreciate the president, putting a little bit of pressure on there, and it seemed to work. Up until that time, they told us they were not going to tell us, and we were going to have to just wait for the things to be unsealed. But yeah, it was horrific what Kaylee went through. Yeah, and I don't want to protect this guy, but I won't give out all the details. I'll be general, but yeah, she was stabbed over 30 plus times, and she was struck, and there was quite a bit of damage to her face. So this guy's just an absolute monster. Anyone who thinks that he's otherwise, I just looked at pure demons out there. When I was looking at him, we had a stare down, and he's just filled with demons. He's dark pits of eyes, and there's something seriously wrong with that man.
Steve, why was it important for you to look him directly in the eyes? And what did you see as you spoke to him?
I looked him straight in the eyes, and I just seen black holes and just anger at me. He was telling me with his face that he fucking hated me. He absolutely fucking hated me.
And why did you want to speak to him directly that way?
It's the most personal one. Like,
Yeah,
look at
yeah,
me in my eye. You took my daughter's life. Look at me.
Yeah,
Did your family get something today that it needed?
Yeah, 100%.
It's a little early to actually even answer that for myself. I think that kind of stuff needs to set in and sink in, and you regret maybe saying some things, or you wish that you would have said things. So I think right now we're just kind of in the mix of the tornado and the real feelings.
As the spotlight then fades, what do you want the public to remember?
Our main thing is hopefully this could be a template for another family that, you can use the media as much as they're using you. You can use it to keep people accountable, keep people honest, keep the court system, treating you with a little bit of respect. And I think that's what we did. And the more that you get active, I think the more chance that you're going to get that justice in the end. I think you really got to try to make your kids stand out, or you know, whoever you're trying to protect, you make them real. Get on the internet and talk to people.
Before you go, and I know you want to go, I want to ask, Olivia today was spectacular. But Olivia asked a question, what was the other weapon you used on my sister? Despite this meeting you had with the prosecutors, there still sounds like there's something you don't know there. Can you explain that to us?
No, we do know that another weapon was used on Kaylee. So we don't know what that weapon was. But
They didn't recover it.
along with the knife wasn't recovered, but Kaylee was not just stabbed. There was other things that happened to Kaylee.
Talk about that a little. The conversation we had with the prosecution was about healing more than anything. It was about giving the victims' families answers. And they may share some of that information at a later date, but today is not the day for that. Today is about the sentencing. It's about putting the defendant in prison for the rest of his life. So there may be more details to come about that, but that conversation that they had was about the healing process and finding some answers that they had. And so we may share at a later date, but today's not the day. Okay?
Thank you guys for just being available.
Thanks.
Shannon.
So the Gonzalez.
All right, so you're watching Live Impact News on WCNC Plus. I'm Nick Sturdivant. Right there is our content partners there in Seattle, Washington, King 5. Their coverage, that is my chair. Their coverage after Bryan Kohberger was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without parole for the brutal stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students nearly 3 years ago. We just heard from the family of Kaylee Goncalves. And again, they got an opportunity to talk about how they're feeling, giving their reaction after this sentencing. Again, this is a story that we are continuing to follow and continuing to cover. And as more updates come, we will update you. And if we hear from more victims' families, we will take you there directly.